Well, Sonia Purnell joins me now. Over to you, Sonia. I apologise for the delay that we've had. You'll understand because of the breaking news. Sonia has written a book called Just Boris, The Irresistible Rise of a Political Celebrity. Now, talking to some of Boris's advisers today, they're very keen to stress his record rather than his celebrity. But how do you explain the Boris Johnson phenomenon? Because it is a kind of political phenomenon, isn't it? Because people out there, when you see Boris walking down the street, he's mobbed by people who don't see him as a conservative particularly. They don't even see him as a politician. He's a celebrity.
He is celebrity. That's why we put that title on the book. I mean, I was very interested in what you said, that people hadn't seen anything at a party conference before like the Back Boris stand here. And I think that's right. There's never been a politician quite like Boris before. I mean, he is charismatic, he's fun, he's charming, he's the non-politician politician, if you like. And people like to be swept up in that. He cheers us up. I mean, there's certainly something very cheery about him when he's out and about. And he loves to be liked. And so, you know, he's very good if someone's driving past in a van and shouts, "Hi, bozzer," he'll always sort of, you know, shout something friendly back. And but equally, he's brilliant with the sort of the ladies from the shires. I mean, he is someone who knows how to excite people and make them like him.
Now, you first met him in the Daily Telegraph Brussels bureau. When you the first time you set eyes on Boris Johnson, what immediately went through your head?
Well, actually, initially I wasn't thinking too much about Boris. I was coming straight from the airport. My plane had been late. I dumped my suitcases on the office floor and I had to go and cover some press conference that John Major, who was in town, was giving. There was another sort of crisis in the EC as it was then. And Boris said, "Oh, well, you know, there's a building down there, which is where he'll be, and go down there about 2 miles and you'll find it." And so I rushed off down there, as he said, for 2 miles through the rain, couldn't get a taxi, arrived horribly late to find that the press conference wasn't there at all. It was actually very, very near the office. I'd never been to Brussels before, apart from for 4 hours in the previous visit. And I just thought that was a very strange thing at the time and sort of wondered why, because I then got into a bit of trouble for being late for that press conference. And I thought, well, this is either a very shambolic person or a very ruthless person. And so I asked myself that question then, and I've asked myself that question many times since, and I think I know the answer.
Well, you think he deliberately told you to go to the wrong place? I
don't know, but it did make me think.
Why on earth would you think that?
Because he didn't seem at all surprised when I came back and said it wasn't down there. So, yes, well, next door. So it was just one of those strange things, and you just think this is quite a strange person, interesting person, incredibly clever person, but someone who isn't quite like other people. I mean, I'm sure he knew Brussels brilliantly, back to front. He'd been there for some time, and he knew his stuff. I mean, he is,
But I mean, he's famously shambolic for being late. I mean, I remember when I was a Tory candidate, he was coming up to Norfolk to support me, and instead of going to Liverpool Street, he went to King's Cross. I mean, it's just the sort of thing Boris does.
Yes, I've read that story. I've seen other stories. Obviously, I've witnessed this myself. And it's very frustrating for a lot of people.
I mean, you do describe him in the book as the most ruthless and ambitious person that you've ever met. Justify that.
OK, well, I suppose one of the things that I saw was that, sometimes he seemed to be much more sympathetic to the EU in private than he did in print. And he used to do this thing, we used to call it the 4 o'clock rant, where he would sort of work himself up every day by sort of shouting at this poor yucca plant in his office. And I think people walking past outside, we had this rather sort of nice office in the Square Marie-Louise in Brussels, used to be rather alarmed at this torrent of expletives. And then this kind of storm would pass, and he would sit down and he would write something totally brilliant and, crafted beautifully on his old Tandy. But he seemed to sort of have to work himself up into this frenzy to write this stuff. So, again, I thought this was quite unusual. But I also saw the focus. When he was doing that, he would lock his office door. No one could disturb him. He was utterly focused in a way that I've not really seen, I think, in anyone else. And, and that's gone on over the years. And it's not just, me. It's not just me who's made that observation. And Paul Goodman, who worked with him at the Telegraph, for instance, and was his comment editor there, and obviously later a Tory MP, said he's a bit like the child in the playground. It is another child with an ice cream. He wants the ice cream, and he'll trample all the other children to get the ice cream. No matter who gets hurt, he wants that ice cream, and that is how he comes across. If you work closely with him, you see that sort of torrent of focus and drive and energy. He's super energetic.
I haven't read all of the book because I've been here. I only got the book yesterday. But from the bits I've read so far, I'm slightly unclear as to whether you're a real Boris admirer or, I mean, there's part of me that thinks you're kind of slightly in love with him from some of the bits that I've read. You're fascinated by his love life. No, I'll answer on radio tonight. I'm not in love with Boris Johnson. You've never fancied Boris? Can we reveal that as an exclusive on LBC?
That can be your exclusive. I've never fancied Boris. I don't think he's ever fancied me.
Many women have.
Either. No, so I gather. And I can see why, perhaps, he might be attractive. He doesn't do it for me. He's just absolutely not my type. And I think probably that feeling is mutual.
Well, I think it is after having read the bits that I've read, but there we go.
Oh, I don't see why. I mean, it's a perfectly balanced book with lots and lots of good stuff about Boris. And, as well as the more sort of robust and areas of scrutiny, which I think is quite right for anyone who wants to be Prime Minister, which he does.
Well, we'll come on to that in just a few minutes' time. It's Sonia Purnell, who's written a book called Just Boris, The Irresistible Rise of a Political Celebrity. If you've got a question you'd like to put to Sonia, the number 0845 6060 973. This is LBC 97.3. It's 9:30.
Have your say with Ian Dale.
Now you're listening to the LBC Book Club live from the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. We will be talking to Michael McManus in just a few minutes' time, the author of Tory Pride and Prejudice, the Conservative Party and Homosexual Law Reform. Before that, we're going to continue our conversation with Sonia Purnell, who's written a biography of Boris Johnson. But let me just tell you what's coming up at 10 with Anthony Davis. The school leaving age should be cut to 14, according to the former head of Ofsted. Anthony Davis will be asking whether 14 is too young to let your child leave school. Also, parents will not have to identify themselves as either mother or father in applications for new British passports for their children, the Home Office said. What difference will this make to you? And sellout shows in the West End and full houses at home have resulted in record profits for the National Theatre. What's the last production you went to see? All that and more with Anthony Davis from 10. Right, Sonia Purnell's book, Just Boris, The Irresistible Rise of a Political Celebrity. It's quite a doorstop, this book, isn't it?
We had to cut a lot out.
Cool, 430 pages. What's the price? £20.
It's very good value for money.
Well, it clearly is. But I mean, he's how old is Boris? About 46?
47.
God, imagine if he lives to 90. 800 pages. Now, what made you want to write the book? I mean, what was the motivation?
The motivation was simply that he is probably the most. I think he is actually definitely the most fascinating, multifaceted, celebrity, public figure of his time. We all interested in Boris. When I was researching the book, it was very difficult to finish interviews. No one wanted to stop talking. I kept missing trains home, and sort of families would be phoning up saying, "Where are you?" And people loved talking about him. They want to know more about him. I realised that there was an appetite here, his box office, but I didn't feel that, although we knew a lot about Boris, that we necessarily completely understood him. So that's what the book is attempting to do.
And you're convinced that his ultimate political ambition is to become Prime Minister?
Yes.
And what's that based on?
Well, again, working with him, knowing a lot of people who've worked very closely with him since the time that I did, just watching him. I've observed him very closely for 20 years. And, that's clearly, he wants to be the biggest, the biggest figure on the biggest stage, and the biggest show in town is politics, and the biggest job is obviously Prime Minister. That's what he wants to do. I wrote about this in 2002 in the Independent on Sunday. I think I might have been the first person to raise this prospect in print, and a lot of people thought it was preposterous at the time. I think far fewer people think that now. That's what he wants. And, there's a good chance that he'll get it.
Do you really think so? I mean, I just wonder, people who write that Boris could become leader of the Conservative Party, I always think don't actually understand the rules of the Conservative Party leadership elections. And I just wonder whether Boris would ever be able to get the number of MPs that he would need to support him. I mean, he has to become an MP first again, and I mean, thereby hangs another tale. But assuming that he did get back into the House of Commons and then ran for the Conservative Party leadership, do you really think that there are enough Tory MPs that would back him?
Well, I think, he is an opportunist, and I think it is difficult to see right now that the road map, if you like, between City Hall and Downing Street. I totally, agree with you on that. I couldn't agree with you more on that. But, he is this incredible opportunist. He's fantastic at seizing chances. And there are a lot of different Tory MPs now than there were when he was in Parliament previously, where he didn't make himself terribly popular. He wasn't much of a team player.
But he's not actually making himself known to them now. He's not holding little drinks parties in City Hall for them, is he?
That's not his style, but he doesn't really like that intimacy. That's not Boris's style at all. His style is to wow them, here at conference, and he's just been rehearsing next door just before I came on air. So, he takes this incredibly seriously. This is his kind of theatre, if you like, much more than the House of Commons ever was, which he found quite difficult. But here he can, he kind of curries favour. He makes them fall in love with him, and he's very good at that.
Well, we'll see tomorrow night on LBC, because I'll be speaking to Boris live in conversation in front of a live audience here in Manchester from 7:15 to 8 o'clock. There's part of me that's really looking forward to doing this, and there's part of me, to be honest, that's absolutely dreading it, because what if he arrives late? Which, let's face it, does happen.
Okay, what people used to do...
What should I do if he arrives late?
Well, tell him that it's an hour earlier than it really is.
Do you know, I have actually done that a little bit. I've given them a time 15 minutes early. Isn't that a naughty thing to
don't say it on air,
well, no,
I just did.
They'll all be listening now, won't they? But anyway, I've given that one away. Now, whenever anybody writes an unauthorised biography, when it comes out, there are always people that like to trash it. Stanley Johnson, Boris's father, has accused you of false allegations and says some of the stuff in your book is total rubbish. One or two people that knew that you were coming on here have said to me, I've read about meetings that I was involved in and the accounts are not correct. What do you say to these people?
I say to these people that I've spoken to 200 people, some on the record, many on the record, some off the record. I'm totally sure of my sources. I double-checked everything. I spent 18 months on this, 70, 80 hours a week, quite often, checking things. I know that the story is correct. As you say, when there's an unauthorised biography, people don't always want things to come out. They can't control information. But, I'm a journalist of many, many years standing, and this is a proper journalistic job. This is a proper biography that really has attempted to find out what happened, even if people don't necessarily want all those facts and meetings, things to come out.
One final question. Boris and Dave, do they get on? I mean, we keep reading that they're at loggerheads, and other people say it's all manufactured, they get on fine, but it's quite convenient for them to be seen as being split in some way. What's the truth?
Well, I think, they both have, there's a school in common, there is a surface conviviality between them. When Boris is at City Hall and something happens in a meeting, he'll quite often say, wait, I've got to text Dave about this. But it kind of is part of the show, really. Yes, they are friendly to each other, but neither of them is under any, sort of illusion that they don't know that Boris wants Cameron's job. And, Cameron's people say, we know that this is part of the political geography. It's just a fact of life. And
well, Sonia, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sorry it's been a little bit shorter than we'd intended, but that's the nature of breaking news, I'm afraid. Sonia Purnell's book, Just Boris, The Irresistible Rise of a Political Political Celebrity, is published by Aurum Press, and it's in hardback at £20. Thank you very much indeed, Sonia. Now, let's move on to our next guest. His name is Michael McManus. He's written a book called Tory Pride and Prejudice, the Conservative Party and Homosexual Law Reform, and he joins us now, just effortlessly sliding into the chair just vacated by Sonia Purnell. Michael, good evening.
Hello, Ian.
Now, the history of the Tory party and homosexuality, in particular homosexual law reform, is not a happy one, is it? What motivated you to write this book?
Well, I don't think one is motivated to write happy stories. It's an interesting story, and I think what motivated me is sort of the telescope backwards. The change in recent times has been so extraordinary, so rapid, and I think so profound that it's very important to look at what people were saying 10, 20 or 40 years ago to realise just how much David Cameron et al. Have achieved, and to make sure it never happens again. Because some of the language people used to use about gay and lesbian people, no civilised person should use about a fellow human being. And a lot of this was coming from within the Tory party. But it was a minority even then.
Was it, though?
Well, I think it was, yeah. I think the party was held to ransom by a vocal minority who were prejudiced for reasons of upbringing, and in some cases for reasons of their own little hang-ups, I think, Ian, one might say.
Can't think what you mean.
I think you know exactly what I mean. I think the listeners know what I mean too. But some very messed up people said some very horrible things. And so there's this great explosion. I think it was when Michael Howard took over as leader, really. In 2003, going into 2004, the man who introduced Section 28 became the man who started this process of liberalisation.
And why did he change his mind? Because you're right, I think. He was the leader of the party. This more liberal attitude to gay issues in the Tory party could not have happened if the party leader hadn't sanctioned it.
No, absolutely. I think part of it was, we understand how politics works, Ian, you and I, that it's all very tribal. You tend to go where the majority of your tribe is going. And unfortunately, Margaret Thatcher, then John Major to an extent, but William Hague to a great extent, turned issues of gay rights and equal rights into party matters, not issues of personal conscience. And you had to be a brave soul with the thought of jeopardising your career in your head to stick your neck out and go the opposite way. When the division came, the whips were watching you, you were thinking about your personal possibilities going forward. And Michael Howard's great inspiration was to say, no, come on, this is all about personal freedom. And it's about personal conscience.
And the reform, we'll go back into the history in a moment, but just sticking on this period of when the attitudes really changed among senior Tories, it was really on the gay adoption debate, wasn't it?
Well, the gay adoption debate, it's shorthand, as you know. The issue had been, at the risk of going into too much detail, that until the Blair government came along, a same-sex couple could adopt a child, but only one of them could be a legal guardian. So if the couple broke up, only one of them had any claim over the child. The child had a legal relationship only with one of them. The Blair government, mindful of the declining number of adopting couples, thought we'd better change the law. And, the news in the last week that only 60 children were adopted in the whole year in England shows, in fact, they didn't succeed. The problem is still there. But somehow symbolically, that became the issue on which the Tory party kind of broke, and the leadership of Ian Duncan Smith broke because he put a whip on, saying this was fundamentally wrong, it should be married couples only. Andrew Lansley, Health Secretary, said, well, why married couples only? John Bercow, now Speaker, said, why man-woman couples only? And somehow it just brought it all into focus. We're now in the 21st century.
Shall I tell you a funny story about that?
Yes.
Relating to Anne Widdecombe, who, as you can imagine, was not in favour of gay adoption.
She still isn't.
She still isn't. And I remember driving with her on the night of the vote of that debate to a theatre where we were doing one of our theatre shows. God, that was what was that? Back in 2003, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
God, 8 years ago. We've been doing these shows for 8 or 9 years. Unbelievable. Anyway, we were talking about this vote, and I said, I really can't understand why it wasn't a free vote. And anyway, surely the most important thing about a child's upbringing is the fact that it should be a stable couple and a loving couple that should be able to adopt a child, whether they're straight or gay. I knew what the reaction would be, of course. She said, well, it's just not true that gay relationships are stable. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, I've read evidence that most gay relationships only last for 2 years. And I said, well, in many people's experience, it's only 20 minutes.
No,
she did laugh, it has to be said.
No, but, Anne is, as we know, a rather sort of camp theatrical figure, but also has these very strong Catholic views on matters. She was the one totally unrepentant, small C conservative, old school Tory I interviewed for the book. Others either wouldn't talk to me or would adjust their views a bit. But, she obviously is uncomfortable with the concept of a same-sex partnership.
Which is bizarre, because many of her friends are gay.
Well, look, she's in showbiz now. I mean, she's cultivating the market.
Strictly, darling.
Yes, strictly, very strictly. No, but, I admire her in a way. I mean, Anne's an old friend of mine and she's an old friend of yours. I mean, we both adore the woman. But, she just won't budge an inch on it. No. And one admires it, but wishes that she would just, say, actually, the evidence of my eyes rather than what the book says tells me that, people can love each other in the way they do. And, no, she was the one who would not budge an inch, and you need that in a book. You need somebody who will dig in for the old school.
Well, we will talk a little bit more about the book in just a few moments' time. Tory Pride and Prejudice, the Conservative Party and Homosexual Law Reform, by Michael McManus. The time now, 9:46.
3. Call 0845 60 60 973. Text 84850. Have your say with Ian Dale.
Now, the breaking news here tonight on LBC 97.3 is that Amanda Knox has been cleared of the murder of Meredith Kershaw. She's been released from the courtroom, from jail in Perugia, Italy tonight. Apparently very angry scenes on the streets of Perugia. Anthony Davis will have much more on this after 10. Now, before then, we're going to continue our conversation with Michael McManus, the author of Tory Pride and Prejudice, the Conservative Party and Homosexual Law Reform. Let's stick with sort of current events, Michael, because the Conservative Party, I think, has become much more gay-friendly. They have, I think, is it 21 out gay MPs, and probably
well, it's a bit of a moot point, isn't it, Ian?
Well,
yes.
I don't know.
I think probably 14 or 15, but I think probably we could notch that up to about 30 between us if we tried. But I think technically about 15. No, don't worry about that.
But it shows there's some way to go, though. If you and I know of, say, a dozen Tory MPs that just actually haven't come out of the closet, admitted that they're gay, it shows that it's not fully there yet.
Yes, it does. But, having said that, the Tory party has more openly gay MPs than all the other parties put together. That's a huge achievement, a very rapid achievement. Think back 25 years. It would have been totally unthinkable in those days when the question was asked, is there anything in your background that might embarrass the party, which was code for saying, where's the wife, where are the kids, That's all gone. I
remember being asked that question at a selection meeting in Chipping Barnet back in 2003. That was the first time. The first seat that I'd applied for. Was astonished to get an interview, and the chairwoman of the meeting. The interview had gone really, really well. I was very excited that I'd done quite well, and then she asked this question, and I remember saying, just on the spur of the moment, I said, well, it's not embarrassing to me, and I hope it's not embarrassing to you, but, and then sort of gave a little spiel, got lots of laughs, lots of nods of the head, seemed to have gone very well. And then afterwards, the agent walked out of the room behind me and said, what on earth did you do that for? And I said, well, she asked the question, so I answered it. Simple as that. Now, I'm quite convinced now that had I not said that, and just gone through the selection process in the same way that people have done for decades and decades, I would have stood. I failed to get into the final by 2 votes. I reckon I would have done that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the contrasting story, which is, I suppose, a year and a half later, just before the 2005 election, Nick Herbert became the first openly gay Tory to be selected for a seat he was going to win, a safe seat. And talking to Nick, the interesting thing was, he said, the people selecting just loved his partner. Because his partner, solicitor, very conservative, nicely turned out, the classic, lovely guy. And the fact that it was a man and a man was secondary to the fact that he was just a real asset, a really nice guy.
I can remember, we spoke to Nick on the programme earlier, but I had several conversations with him about it, because he knew that I'd been through it and wanted my advice on it. And I said, well, you have to do what you want to do. There's nobody can give you advice on this. If you think it's the right thing to do, then you must do it. Yeah. And he did. And you're right, it worked.
Yeah, well, and it works. Well, I think the big point at the heart of all this, I hope you agree, you may not, is that the Conservative Party doesn't have an ideology. We have a general outlook. We believe in freedom. We believe in people, living their lives. We live in a small, uncomplicated state. It is entirely consistent with that to have equal respect and equality before the law for gay people. It makes sense. In fact, we've come to the point of internal coherence, of logic. This is where the Tories ought to be, more than anyone else.
And who are the heroes of your book?
Well, apart from you, Ian, there are one or two others. I think Edwina Curry, who's now back in the public eye.
Flashing her knickers,
yes.
I gather.
Well, and she's lost £5, apparently.
Is she really?
She is. It was the first time she's ever paid for a round. No, Edwina is a great heroine. In 1994, she was the Tory who co-sponsored the amendment to a Criminal Justice Act for an equal age of consent. Eleanor Lang, the Member of Parliament for Epping Forest. Her predecessor, Steve Norris.
Who will be on the programme tomorrow night.
Well, Eleanor Lang is...
as will Steve Norris.
Well,
not talking about this.
But. Well, but ask them about it, because... in both cases, the same seat, Epping Forest, not naturally, obviously, liberal-leaning constituency, a safe Tory seat. But, Steve, oh my goodness me, if ever a man didn't have to declare an interest when he was advocating equal rights for gay people, Steve and then Eleanor, his successor, both totally fearless. Matthew Parris, I think, in an earlier generation, who came out in a parliamentary debate but nobody noticed, and so he decided to go on and do other things. There are heroes, but to be honest, the big heroes are the ones who've moved the party, who went beyond being lone voices in the wilderness and took charge of the party with a mandate to move us on, to bring us up to date with the modern world in the 21st century. And, for me, I think probably George Osborne is the biggest hero. I think George, with his rather cosmopolitan background, his very relaxed upbringing, he knew gay people when he was young. There's no issue. And I think George probably argued this out with David Cameron. David, very different background, more sort of, genteel, more naturally Tory, rural background, probably never even thought about gay issues.
And voted to retain Section 28.
He did once, in the very early days, but, that's what you do. You're a newly elected MP, you're ambitious, you're in a small minority. Very quickly, George pushed ahead. George voted to get rid of it, David abstained. And, you need the people who just push the envelope, push a bit harder. And I think, George Osborne now senior is the man who's in charge of the economy, but actually in terms of social policy, really moved the Tory party ahead. But I think I can imagine it, because I've known David Cameron for 20 years, actually having the conversation with David, he would be totally rational and calm about it. He's totally unprejudiced. He probably just never thought about it. And now he is the Prime Minister who is saying, we're going to move forward, we'll have gay marriage, we'll have marriage equality. It's amazing. Ian, here we are at the Tory party conference. Where is the plague of frogs? Where is the plague of locusts? It hasn't happened. We're at the forefront. We're pushing this forward. And everyone's cool about it. They're just talking about other things. It's an extraordinary achievement.
And what reaction have you had to the book?
Incredibly warm. Ministers, MPs.
Because there's a story that had to be told, really, isn't it?
Yes, I think it
really did.
Yes, and Nick Bowles, who's one of the newly elected Tory MPs from last year, said to me at the end of an interview, and I was a bit crestfallen, he said to me, well, I hope it's the only book that's ever written about this. And I went away and thought about it and thought, actually, that's very flattering, because really what he's saying is, so far as this crazy episode is concerned, it's an episode of 50 or 60 years in the history of the Tory party, we've now woken up, grown up, dealt with it, we move on. This is the end of history, and I hope it is, and that's thanks to David Cameron and George Osborne.
Because I kind of wonder, you know this, but I should declare the interest. I published this book, and we published an accompanying volume by a former Tory MP called Ian Harvey, who was sort of discovered in the bushes with the Guardsmen in St James's Park back in 1959 or something.
Yes.
And he was forced out of politics. And I've often thought, I wonder what he would make of your book and the distance the Tory party has come since those days.
Well, his book is quite heartbreaking, really, because he vanished from sight. He was a broken man. Macmillan tried to talk him out of resigning as an MP, accepted his resignation as the Foreign Office Minister, and he became a sort of sad figure. There was a very small campaign for gay rights in those days in the Tory party in the 70s. He helped set it up, but, you know, he was a pathetic figure and died a broken man. Nobody listened to him, no one respected him. I just don't think he could possibly comprehend what's happened.
No, it's a very moving story.
No, it's a heartbreaking
when you
story.
read it. Well, Michael, sorry we've had not quite as much time as we had intended to because of the breaking news tonight, but thank you very much for joining us on the programme.
Thank you.
That's Michael McManus. His book is called Tory, Pride and Prejudice, the Conservative Party and Homosexual Law Reform. I've forgotten the price. It's £20, published by Back Publishing. Now, I'll be back at 7:15 tomorrow with the In Conversation with Boris Johnson. This is LBC 97.3. Coming up next, Anthony Davis.